4 generations of Callahan men have served in the United States Navy. My grandfather charted minefields in the Pacific. My father navigated destroyers through Korean waters. I spent 30 years guiding warships through blind storms without instruments, relying only on dead reckoning, the ancient art of finding your position when everything around you has gone dark. But nothing across 4 generations of naval service prepared me for the night my son called from an aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf and told me his wife was at a luxury resort with another man. I set the phone on my lap and stared at the woman standing in my kitchen doorway, smiling at me. She was holding my evening medication in one hand and a glass of warm milk in the other. I appreciate you being here. Before the story unfolds, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. It is amazing to see listeners from around the world. And just a quick note, certain elements in this story are fictional for entertainment and educational purposes. Any similarities to real people or locations are coincidental, though the message is meaningful. My name is Robert Callahan. Most people call me Bobby. I am 67 years old. And for the past 9 weeks, I have been recovering from major spinal surgery inside the house I built with my own hands on the banks of the Ashley River in Charleston, South Carolina. The house has stood on this land for nearly a century. My grandfather laid the original foundation stones after returning from the Pacific in 1945. My father reinforced the structure when he came home from Korea. I redesigned the entire second floor after my own 30-year career navigating guided missile cruisers across every ocean on this planet. 4 generations of Callahan men have bled for this country and come home to this house. It is not simply a building. It is a monument to every sacrifice this family has ever made. My son followed the tradition without hesitation. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Callahan, currently serving as a navigation officer aboard the aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. Ford, deployed somewhere in the Persian Gulf. He had been at sea for 5 months with 2 more remaining. His wife, Monica, had volunteered to move into the family house to care for me after my surgery. She told Ethan it was the least she could do for the father who had welcomed her into the Callahan family. Everyone praised her devotion. The neighbors brought casseroles and told me how blessed I was. Even Ethan, calling on scratchy satellite connections, would tell me how grateful he was that his wife had stepped up so selflessly. For 14 months, I believed every word of it. That belief shattered at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. The satellite connection from a carrier in the Persian Gulf is never clean. There is always a delay, a hollow echo, a faint, static hiss, reminding you the voice has traveled thousands of miles through encrypted military channels. But that night, the distortion could not mask the raw tremor in my son's voice. He was whispering, the kind of forced quiet a man uses when standing in a narrow passageway, trying desperately not to be overheard. "Dad," he said, "I need you to listen very carefully and do not react." I was sitting in my leather recliner in the study, the room I had converted into my primary living space since the surgery made climbing stairs an agonizing ordeal. A half-finished cup of chamomile tea sat cooling beside a dog-eared navigation manual I had been rereading out of stubborn habit. Ethan explained in short, fragmented sentences that a fellow officer had been scrolling through social media during a brief connectivity window aboard the carrier. A mutual acquaintance had posted a short video from the Fontainebleau Resort in Miami Beach. In the background, clearly visible beside the main pool, a woman was kissing a man in a fitted linen suit. She had dark hair pulled into a low twist and wore a white sundress with thin shoulder straps. The man had his arm wrapped possessively around her waist. Ethan's shipmate recognized her immediately. "Dad, it is Monica." His voice cracked on her name, like a hull striking a reef. "I am looking at the screenshot right now. She is at a resort in Miami with another man, and she is supposed to be taking care of you." The words hit me with the force of a rogue wave. I gripped the arm of my recliner, feeling the old leather creak under my knuckles. My surgical scar throbbed violently along my lower spine. I forced myself to breathe the way 3 decades of open ocean had trained me. Slow, measured, controlled. Panic capsizes a ship faster than any storm. You stabilize the vessel first. Then you assess the damage. Send me the image, I said, keeping my voice level. Seconds later, my phone vibrated. I opened the photograph. The resolution was grainy, pulled from a social media video, but the details were undeniable. The sharp angle of her jaw, the elegant slope of her neck, the specific way she tilted her head slightly to the left when she smiled. I had watched that gesture across hundreds of family dinners. The man beside her was tall, deeply tanned, with the easy confidence of someone entirely comfortable spending other people's money. Then I heard a sound from the kitchen, the soft padding of bare feet on old heart pine floorboards. A woman appeared in the doorway of my study, wearing light gray yoga pants and a loose white cotton top. Her dark hair was pulled into a low twist. She smiled at me with the effortless warmth of someone who had spent 14 months becoming a permanent fixture in this house. She asked if I was ready for my evening medication and held out a small dish of pills in one hand and a glass of warm milk in the other. I looked at the photograph on my screen. I looked at the woman in my doorway. The face was identical. The hair, the build, the posture, the practiced smile were all absolutely indistinguishable. But 30 years of navigating warships through deceptive waters had trained my senses to detect what the untrained eye would dismiss. A navigator learns to feel when the current beneath his hull does not match the chart on his table. Something was moving beneath the surface of this woman's perfect performance. "She is right here," I said into the phone, standing in the doorway with my medication. "You must be exhausted from the deployment, son. The mind plays terrible tricks when the body runs on no sleep." I watched her while I spoke. Her smile never wavered. She had no idea the man on the other end had just sent me a photograph that could dismantle her entire world. Ethan exhaled a long, uneven breath. I told him to drink water, to focus on his duties, and to let me handle things. I promised I would take Monica to lunch tomorrow and send proof everything was fine. He resisted briefly, but exhaustion won. He ended the call. I accepted the warm milk from her hand, swallowed my medication, and thanked her quietly. She patted my shoulder, turned off the hallway light, and disappeared toward the back of the house. I sat motionless in the dark study, listening to the ancient bones of my house settle around me. The Ashley River murmured beyond the garden wall. The woman walking down my hallway was smiling, comfortable, and entirely convinced the old man in the recliner suspected nothing. She was wrong. I had spent my entire life reading the sea, and I knew exactly when calm water was hiding rocks beneath the surface. I did not sleep. I lay flat on my back in the narrow hospital-style bed the physical therapist had set up in the downstairs study, staring at the ceiling fan rotating in slow hypnotic circles above me. My spine ached with the deep grinding pain that had become my constant companion since the surgery. But the physical discomfort barely registered against the weight of what I had learned. A navigator who suspects his charts are wrong does not panic. He does not immediately change course or sound a general alarm. He observes. He takes additional bearings. He compares every available reference point against the data he already trusts. Only after confirming the discrepancy beyond any reasonable doubt does he act. When the pale gray light of a Charleston morning began filtering through the plantation shutters, I heard footsteps moving through the upstairs hallway. The shower ran for exactly 12 minutes. Then the familiar pattern of a woman descending the main staircase, each step landing with a light, confident rhythm. She appeared in the kitchen wearing dark athletic leggings and a fitted cream-colored sweater. Her hair was damp, combed straight, falling just past her shoulders. She moved directly to the coffee machine with the ease of someone who had performed this exact routine 100 times before. Within minutes, the rich, heavy aroma of dark roast coffee filled the lower floor. "Good morning, Bobby," she called brightly from the kitchen island. "Did you sleep well? I have your morning pills ready, and I am making that oatmeal you like with the brown sugar and pecans." Her voice was warm and musical, carrying the faint traces of a northeastern accent that Monica had always possessed. The pitch, the cadence, the slight upward lilt at the end of certain sentences were all precisely calibrated. If I had not received that phone call 12 hours ago, I would have accepted this performance without a single question. I pulled myself carefully out of bed, gripping the metal rail with both hands as my lower back screamed in protest. I shuffled slowly into the kitchen, deliberately exaggerating the stiffness in my movements. I needed her to see a broken old man struggling through his morning routine, not a retired naval officer conducting a systematic threat assessment. She placed a steaming bowl of oatmeal in front of me and slid my medication across the counter with a glass of orange juice. I thanked her with a tired, grateful smile. Then I began to observe. When Monica first married Ethan 2 years ago, I spent considerable time getting to know her. She was a real estate professional from New York, sharp and ambitious, with a polished confidence that initially concerned me, but gradually won my respect. I cataloged her habits the way I once cataloged navigational waypoints, not out of suspicion, but because understanding the people you love is the most fundamental form of care. Monica wore a specific perfume. She had mentioned the name once during a family dinner. A high-end jasmine blend she ordered from a boutique in Manhattan. The scent was distinctive, rich and slightly sweet, with an unmistakable floral depth that lingered in every room she occupied. I had grown so accustomed to it over 14 months that it had become an invisible part of the household atmosphere. This morning, as the woman leaned across the counter to hand me a napkin, a completely different scent passed through the air between us. It was vanilla. Cheap, synthetic, commercial vanilla. The kind you find in a drugstore body spray. The jasmine was completely absent. I picked up my spoon and stirred the oatmeal slowly. "That is a lovely new fragrance," I said casually, keeping my eyes on the bowl. "Are you trying something different?" She paused for a fraction of a second. The hesitation was microscopic, barely detectable. But to a man trained to read the subtle shift of ocean currents on a flat horizon, it was as conspicuous as a flashing beacon. "Oh," she said, recovering quickly with a light laugh. "I found a sample in a magazine and thought I would try it for a change. Do you like it?" "It is very pleasant," I replied with a gentle nod, filing the data point away in the growing ledger inside my mind. I continued eating in silence, watching her move around the kitchen. She wiped the counters, rinsed the coffee pot, and reorganized the vitamins in the cabinet above the stove. Her movements were smooth and practiced, clearly rehearsed to replicate the domestic patterns of the woman she was impersonating. But muscle memory is an extraordinarily difficult thing to fabricate. Monica was left-handed. This was not a minor detail or an ambiguous trait. Her left-handedness defined her physical interaction with every object she touched. She wrote with her left hand. She stirred her coffee with her left hand. She instinctively reached for door handles, light switches, and kitchen utensils with her left hand. And because she was left-handed, she wore her wristwatch on her right wrist, the standard convention for left-dominant individuals who want to avoid the watch interfering with their writing hand. The woman standing at my kitchen sink was wearing a delicate silver wristwatch on her left wrist. She held the sponge in her right hand, scrubbing the oatmeal pot with confident, dominant strokes. She reached for the faucet handle with her right hand. She dried the pot and placed it on the shelf, using her right hand. She was right-handed. I lowered my eyes back to my oatmeal and took another slow, deliberate bite. The brown sugar had dissolved into the warm grain, creating a thick, sweet coating that I barely tasted. My mind was no longer in the kitchen. It was operating in the precise clinical mode I had used aboard warships when the navigation data began contradicting itself. Two anomalies. The wrong perfume and the wrong dominant hand. Either one in isolation could be dismissed as coincidence, a woman trying a new scent, or casually switching her watch to the other wrist. But two simultaneous deviations from an established behavioral baseline do not occur by accident. In navigation, we called this a systematic error, a consistent offset, indicating that the instrument itself was fundamentally compromised. The instrument standing in my kitchen, washing dishes and humming a soft melody, was not Monica Callahan. I was now certain of it, but certainty without proof is merely suspicion, and suspicion alone would convince no one. Least of all, my son on a warship 10,000 miles away. I needed a third data point. In dead reckoning, 3 independent bearings are the minimum required to establish a reliable fix on your true position. 2 bearings give you a possibility. 3 bearings give you a fact. I finished my breakfast, thanked her again for the wonderful meal, and shuffled slowly back toward my study. I made sure to pause in the hallway, gripping the doorframe and releasing a heavy, labored sigh, reinforcing the image of a deteriorating old man retreating to his quiet corner to rest. Inside the study, I lowered myself carefully into the leather recliner and closed my eyes. I was not resting. I was calculating. The perfume told me she was a different person. The dominant hand confirmed the physical impersonation was imperfect. Now I needed one definitive test. Something that could not be faked, rehearsed, or explained away. I sat in the stillness of my study, listening to the muffled sounds of the woman moving through the house above me. Then the wireless router on my bookshelf emitted a short electronic beep, and the small green indicator light went dark. The internet connection had dropped. The screen of my tablet displayed a simple prompt requesting the household network password. From the kitchen, I heard her voice call out with a note of mild frustration. "Bobby, the Wi-Fi seems to have gone out. Do you know what happened?" I opened my eyes. The third bearing had just presented itself. The wireless router sat on the third shelf of the mahogany bookcase in my study, nestled between a framed photograph of my late wife and a scale model of the USS Ticonderoga that Ethan had built for me when he was 12 years old. The small device had been installed by Monica herself shortly after she moved into the house. She had configured the network, chosen the security settings, and personally set the password. The password was Callahan 1943. The year my grandfather enlisted in the United States Navy. Monica had chosen it herself during a family dinner, laughing as she typed it into the router settings on her laptop. She said it was the most Callahan password imaginable, and that no hacker on Earth would ever guess something so sentimental. Ethan had kissed her forehead and told her she was officially part of the family. I heard footsteps approaching the study. The woman appeared in the doorway, holding her phone in one hand and frowning at the screen. "The Wi-Fi is completely down," she said, her voice carrying a thin edge of frustration. "I cannot connect to anything. Do you think the router needs to be restarted?" I looked at her with a deliberately blank expression. "Oh dear," I said softly, rubbing my forehead. "I think it does this sometimes. There should be a password to get back on. Do you remember what it is?" The question landed exactly where I intended it. She stared at the phone in her hand, her thumb hovering motionless over the screen. Her eyes shifted slightly to the left, a microscopic tell that I had now observed twice. The involuntary calculation of someone searching for information she did not possess. "I think it is written down somewhere," she said after a pause that lasted 2 full seconds. "Maybe on the bottom of the router itself?" Monica Callahan would never have needed to check the bottom of the router. She configured it. She chose the password. She typed it with her own left hand while the entire family watched. The woman standing in my doorway did not know the password because she had never been in this house on the night it was set. I waved my hand dismissively and pushed myself slowly out of the recliner. "Let me take a look," I said with a tired sigh. My old brain might still remember it. I shuffled to the bookcase, made a deliberate show of squinting at the small text on the back of the router, and carefully typed the password into the device. The green light blinked back to life. The network reconnected. I turned to her and offered a weak smile. "All fixed," I announced. "Callahan 1943. My grandfather's enlistment year. I always forget it myself." She laughed, a quick nervous sound that evaporated the moment it left her lips. "Of course," she said brightly. "I knew that. I just could not remember the exact numbers. Thank you, Bobby." She retreated to the kitchen, and I heard the familiar tap of her fingers on the phone screen, likely confirming to someone that the brief disruption was resolved and everything remained under control. 3 bearings. 3 independent deviations from the established baseline of the woman I had known for 2 years. the wrong perfume, the wrong dominant hand, the wrong memory. In Dead Reckoning, when three separate observations all contradict your assumed position, the conclusion is absolute. You are not where you believed yourself to be. The woman living in my house was not Monica Callahan. I lowered myself back into the recliner and closed my eyes. The immediate question was not who she was. That would reveal itself in time. The critical question was why. Why would Monica need someone to physically occupy her place in this house while she was hundreds of miles away at a luxury resort? The answer required me to think like an adversary rather than a victim. If Monica was conducting an affair, a simple lie about visiting a friend or attending a work conference would suffice. Millions of unfaithful spouses manage their deceptions without planting a physical double inside their father-in-law's home. The presence of this impersonator meant Monica needed more than an alibi for her absence. She needed someone to actively monitor and control my environment while she was gone. That single realization shifted everything. I was not dealing with a careless affair. I was dealing with an operation. I opened my eyes and slowly scanned the room with fresh purpose. My study was cluttered with the accumulated artifacts of a long life. Navigation charts pinned to a corkboard, framed commendations on the walls, shelves heavy with technical manuals and family photographs. I had occupied this room for 9 weeks without ever questioning its contents. Now I questioned everything. My gaze settled on the bookcase, directly opposite my recliner. The mahogany shelves held dozens of hardcover volumes, arranged in the meticulous order my late wife had established decades ago. On the third shelf, between a thick atlas of Atlantic shipping lanes and a leather-bound collection of maritime law, a small dark object was positioned at an angle that did not match the alignment of the surrounding books. I stood up slowly, gripping my cane for support, and walked to the bookcase. I leaned in close, adjusting my reading glasses. Wedged between the spines of 2 books was a compact wireless camera, no larger than a walnut. The tiny glass lens was aimed directly at my recliner, capturing the exact position where I spent the majority of my waking hours. A faint, red pinpoint of light glowed steadily at the base of the device, confirming it was actively recording and transmitting a live feed. She had not installed a security system to protect me from intruders. She had installed a surveillance network to ensure I remained exactly where she wanted me, observable, predictable, and entirely under her control. Every time I took my medication, every phone call I received, every moment I spent sitting in this chair had been streamed directly to Monica's phone, allowing her to monitor my daily patterns from any location on Earth. I stood perfectly still in front of the camera, keeping my facial expression completely neutral. If Monica was watching the live feed at this moment from her resort in Miami, she would see nothing more than a confused old man squinting at his bookshelf, probably looking for a misplaced novel. I reached past the camera without touching it and pulled a random book from the shelf. I carried it back to my recliner, sat down, and opened it across my lap. To the camera, I was an elderly man settling in for a quiet afternoon of reading. Behind the book, my hands were perfectly still, and my mind was operating at full combat alertness. If there was one camera in this room, there were others throughout the house. She had built a cage around me using technology, and I had been sitting inside it for over a year without ever seeing the bars. But cages have a critical design flaw that every prisoner eventually discovers. The walls that keep you contained also define the exact boundaries of your captor's vision. And what your captor cannot see, your captor cannot control. I needed to find every camera in this house. And I needed to map the blind spots. In the Navy, we called it situational awareness, the ability to construct a complete mental picture of your operational environment before the enemy even knows you are paying attention. I had spent 30 years cultivating this discipline aboard warships, where a single undetected threat on the radar could mean the difference between completing your mission and losing your entire crew. Now the operational environment was my own home, and the threat was hiding behind a glass lens the size of a shirt button. I spent the next 2 hours conducting a methodical sweep of the house. The challenge was considerable. I could not simply walk from room to room examining shelves and corners without raising suspicion on whatever live feed was being monitored. Every movement I made had to appear entirely consistent with the behavior of a recovering surgical patient, shuffling aimlessly through his daily routine. I began with the kitchen, using the excuse of making myself a fresh cup of tea. While the kettle heated on the stove, I leaned against the counter and let my eyes drift across the room with the unfocused gaze of a man lost in thought. The second camera was mounted on top of the refrigerator, angled to cover the kitchen island and the hallway entrance. It was disguised inside a small decorative ceramic bowl that Monica had placed there months ago, claiming it was a housewarming gift from a friend. I carried my tea into the living room and settled onto the sofa, pretending to watch the muted television. The third camera sat on the mantelpiece above the fireplace, concealed inside a carved wooden picture frame that held a photograph of Ethan in his dress whites. The lens peered through a tiny hole drilled directly through the matting beside my son's face. The cruelty of that particular placement, hiding a surveillance device inside a portrait of the man she was betraying, made my jaw tighten involuntarily. 3 cameras covering 3 primary rooms: the study, the kitchen, and the living room. Every space where I spent the overwhelming majority of my waking hours was under constant observation. Monica could sit at a poolside bar in Miami Beach and watch me take my pills, eat my meals, and fall asleep in my chair without ever worrying that I might do something unexpected. But every surveillance system has dead zones. The laws of physics and geometry guarantee it. A fixed camera lens covers a specific cone of vision determined by its focal length and mounting angle. Anything outside that cone is invisible. I designed this house. I drew the original blueprints with my own hand on a drafting table in this very study over 30 years ago. I knew the exact dimensions of every room, every hallway, every alcove, and every structural column. I closed my eyes and visualized the floor plan from memory, overlaying the camera positions I had identified onto the architectural layout. The study camera covered my recliner and the desk, but could not see the far corner near the window where the old filing cabinet stood. The kitchen camera covered the island and hallway entrance, but had no line of sight to the pantry or the door leading to the attached garage. The living room camera on the mantelpiece captured the sofa and the front entrance, but missed the narrow corridor leading to the downstairs bathroom and the back staircase. The back staircase, a narrow servant's passage built into the original structure by my grandfather, connecting the kitchen pantry to the upstairs hallway. Monica had never used it. She always took the main staircase from the front foyer, but the back staircase existed in a complete blind spot, invisible to every camera in the house. I had my route. The remaining question was the upper floor. I had not ventured upstairs since my surgery. The physical therapist had cleared me for supervised stair climbing 2 weeks ago. But Monica had strongly discouraged it, insisting the risk of a fall was too great and that everything I needed was available on the ground floor. At the time, I had accepted her caution as genuine concern. Now I understood it for what it truly was. She did not want me upstairs because upstairs was where she kept her secrets. The master bedroom at the end of the second-floor hallway had been locked since the day Monica moved in. She claimed it was a personal security habit from her years living alone in New York, a reasonable explanation that I had never challenged. Ethan had his own set of keys, of course, but he was 10,000 miles away on a warship. And the woman currently occupying this house almost certainly did not have access to that room. I needed to get inside. But first I needed time, uninterrupted and unmonitored, to navigate the upper floor without anyone watching. I found her in the living room that afternoon, curled on the sofa scrolling through her phone. I shuffled into the kitchen and made a deliberate production of preparing 2 cups of tea. I selected chamomile for both, but into hers I stirred a generous measure of the concentrated valerian root tincture my physical therapist had prescribed for my post-surgical insomnia. Valerian is a powerful natural sedative. 2 full droppers dissolved into hot chamomile tea would produce a deep, irresistible drowsiness within 30 minutes. I carried both cups into the living room and offered her one with a warm, paternal smile. "You work so hard taking care of me," I said gently. "Please sit and relax for a moment." You deserve a quiet afternoon." She accepted the cup without hesitation. The valerian was masked entirely by the strong floral bitterness of the chamomile. She sipped it slowly while watching a home renovation program on the television. I sat in the armchair across from her, nursing my own tea and counting the minutes. 22 minutes later, her eyelids began to droop. Her phone slipped from her fingers onto the cushion beside her. Her breathing deepened and slowed into the heavy, rhythmic pattern of genuine sleep. Her head tilted gently to one side, and her body settled completely into the soft cushions of the sofa. I set my teacup down without a sound. I stood up from the armchair, and for the first time since my surgery, I did not shuffle. I did not grip the furniture for support. I did not let my shoulders sag or my knees buckle. I moved through the living room with the quiet, deliberate stride of a man who had spent decades walking the narrow passageways of warships in absolute silence during general quarters. I crossed the kitchen, passed through the pantry, and entered the back staircase. The narrow wooden steps groaned faintly under my weight, but I knew exactly which boards were solid and which would betray me. I placed each foot with the calculated precision of a man walking a navigation bridge in heavy seas, distributing my weight evenly across the strongest structural points. The pain in my spine was extraordinary. Each upward step sent a jagged electric current through my lower back that made my vision blur momentarily at the edges. I gripped the narrow wooden handrail and pulled myself upward through sheer force of will. 14 steps. I counted every one. I emerged onto the second-floor landing. The hallway stretched before me, quiet and dim, the afternoon light filtering through the leaded glass window at the far end. The master bedroom door stood closed at the end of the corridor. The brushed brass handle gleamed faintly in the muted light. I walked toward it. My footsteps made no sound on the old heart pine floorboards. 30 years of living in this house had taught me the precise location of every silent plank. I reached the door and wrapped my hand around the cold brass handle. It was locked. But I had built this house. I knew every joint, every beam, every tolerance in its construction, and I had come prepared. A ship's most critical vulnerabilities are always hidden below the waterline, in the dark compartments no one inspects until the hull has already been breached. I stood before the locked master bedroom door with that principle burning in my mind, knowing that whatever Monica was hiding inside this room was the structural weakness that would either save my family or destroy it. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and withdrew a thin strip of brass I had cut from an old cabinet hinge in the garage workshop 2 hours earlier, while the impersonator was distracted preparing lunch in the kitchen. The strip was approximately 4 inches long, slightly flexible, and filed to a precise taper at one end. I had shaped it during a brief window when I positioned myself in the kitchen camera's blind spot near the pantry door. The interior locks in this house were standard residential privacy sets, not deadbolts. I had installed every one of them myself when I renovated the second floor. They operated on a simple spring-loaded latch mechanism designed to provide privacy, not security. The tolerance between the strike plate and the door frame was exactly 3/32 of an inch. I knew this because I had measured it with my own calipers 30 years ago. I slid the tapered brass strip into the narrow gap between the door edge and the frame, angling it downward toward the angled face of the latch bolt. I applied steady lateral pressure while simultaneously pushing my shoulder against the heavy wood. The brass caught the beveled edge of the latch. I increased the pressure gradually, feeling the internal spring compress through the thin metal strip. The latch retracted with a soft metallic click that sounded deafening in the silent hallway. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The master bedroom was unrecognizable. When my wife was alive, this room had been the warmest space in the house. She had chosen soft ivory curtains that caught the morning light from the river, a hand-woven rug from a market in Savannah, and shelves filled with family photographs spanning 4 generations. After she passed and Ethan married Monica, I had expected some changes. Every new wife has the right to make a space her own. But Monica had not simply redecorated. She had erased every trace of the Callahan family from the room. The warm curtains were replaced with severe charcoal blackout panels. The hand-woven rug was gone, replaced by cold, imported marble tile. The family photographs had been removed entirely. The walls were bare except for a single large abstract painting in sharp blacks and silvers that looked like it belonged in a corporate lobby. The air smelled of expensive lavender diffuser oil and something else underneath it, the sterile metallic scent of absolute control. I moved carefully through the room, scanning every surface. The nightstands were empty. The dresser drawers contained neatly folded clothing, organized with almost military precision. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was carelessly left behind. The room had been sanitized to reveal absolutely nothing on the surface. But I was not looking at surfaces. I was looking for a structural anomaly. People hide their most dangerous secrets in the spaces where they feel the greatest sense of control, and this room had been transformed into Monica's private fortress. I entered the walk-in closet at the far end of the bedroom. It was enormous, far larger than the original design I had drawn. Monica had expanded it during the renovation, knocking out a section of the adjacent wall. Rows of expensive clothing hung in chromatic order. Dozens of shoes were arranged on custom-built shelving along the back wall. The shelving unit was constructed from the same imported wood as the bedroom floor, a seamless extension of her controlled aesthetic. I knelt down slowly on the closet floor. The descent sent a searing bolt of pain through my surgical scar that nearly made me cry out. I clamped my jaw shut and breathed through my nose until the sharpest edge of the pain subsided. Then I began to examine the floor. I built this house. I laid the original subfloor joists with my own hands. I knew the exact spacing between them, 16 inches on center, and I knew the acoustic signature of solid structural framing versus hollow cavity. I pressed my knuckles against the polished wood and rapped gently, listening with the focused intensity of a sonar operator tracking a contact in deep water. Solid. 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 I worked my way methodically along the base of the shoe shelving, knocking every 8 inches. Solid. Solid. Then, near the far corner, where the expanded closet met the original exterior wall, the sound changed. The resonance dropped. The sharp, clear knock of wood backed by solid joist was replaced by a duller, flatter tone. I ran my fingertips along the tight seams of the planks. The carpentry was professional, but wood is a living material that breathes and shifts with temperature and humidity. One specific plank near the baseboard lacked the microscopic accumulation of dust present in all the surrounding grooves. It had been lifted recently and reset with care, but not with the obsessive precision of someone who understood how wood ages. I pulled the thin brass strip from my pocket and wedged it into the clean seam. I applied gentle upward leverage. The plank released smoothly from its seat, revealing a dark rectangular cavity between the floor joists approximately 18 inches long and 12 inches wide. Inside the cavity, stacked with meticulous order, were 3 thick manila folders and a rolled document secured with a rubber band. I lifted the first folder carefully and opened it on the closet floor. The cover page bore the letterhead of a real estate development firm based in Miami. The document was a completed purchase agreement for the Callahan family estate. The buyer was listed as Kane Coastal Development, LLC. The principal officer was Victor Kane. The agreed purchase price was $1.2 million. I stared at the number. $1.2 million. The Charleston historic property market had been independently appraised 18 months ago during a routine insurance review. The assessed value of this house and its waterfront acreage on the Ashley River was $5.6 million. Monica was selling my family's home for less than a quarter of its actual worth. I opened the rolled document and spread it flat across my knees. It was an architectural rendering, a full-color blueprint showing the planned conversion of the Callahan house into a luxury boutique hotel. The original antebellum columns on the front porch were marked for demolition. The wraparound veranda where my grandfather taught my father to tie naval knots was redesigned as a cocktail terrace. My wife's garden, the magnolia trees she planted the year Ethan was born, were replaced by a valet parking lot. They were going to tear the soul out of this house and sell the bones to strangers. The second folder contained personal correspondence. letters and messages between Monica and Victor Kane, spanning nearly 2 years. The early messages were professional, discussing property valuations and development potential. But the tone shifted rapidly into something far more intimate. Pet names, vacation plans, detailed descriptions of a future life together in the south of France, funded entirely by the liquidation of Callahan assets. One message near the bottom of the stack made my blood run cold. Victor had written it 3 months ago. He asked Monica how the old man's situation was progressing. She replied that everything was on schedule, and that by the time Bobby was in a facility and Ethan realized what happened, they would be untouchable. My hands were trembling. Not from weakness. From a fury so deep and so tightly controlled that it vibrated through my bones like the low-frequency hum of a ship's engine running at maximum combat power. I closed the folders carefully and placed them back inside the cavity exactly as I had found them. I still had more to discover. In Dead Reckoning, you trace every course change backward from your current position to reconstruct the exact path that brought you to where you stand. I knelt on the cold floor of that closet and traced the full scope of Monica Callahan's betrayal through the remaining documents hidden beneath the floorboards. The third manila folder was thicker than the first two combined. The top document bore the seal of a licensed notary public in South Carolina. It was a durable power of attorney, granting Monica Callahan full legal authority over all financial, medical, and property decisions on behalf of Robert Edward Callahan, citing my alleged cognitive decline and inability to manage my own affairs. At the bottom of the page was my name written in dark blue ink. The handwriting captured the slight forward lean of my natural script, the specific way I looped my lowercase letters, the distinctive pressure pattern I had developed over decades of signing naval documents. It was a breathtaking forgery. I had never signed this document. I had never authorized any human being on Earth to make decisions on my behalf. Beneath the forged power of attorney were quarterly reports from the Thrift Savings Plan, the federal retirement program for military service members. Ethan had contributed religiously since his first day of active duty. He had mentioned last year that the balance crossed $780,000. The statements 18 months ago matched that number, but each subsequent quarter showed massive systematic withdrawals transferred to accounts I did not recognize. The most recent statement showed a remaining balance of $4,211. She had bled my son's entire military retirement to pocket change. The final items were medical documents, letters addressed to my physician and neurologist, written on official correspondence from a home health agency. They described in clinical detail my alleged progressive cognitive deterioration, memory loss, paranoid episodes, and inability to perform daily tasks without supervision. Every symptom was fabricated. But these documents, combined with the forged power of attorney, created an airtight narrative that any court would accept as evidence I was mentally incompetent and required permanent institutional care. The full architecture assembled itself with sickening clarity. 3 prongs. Financial. She drained Ethan's retirement while he was deployed. Property. She arranged to sell our home to her lover for a fraction of its value. And the third prong was the most insidious. She was engineering my legal death. Not physical. Something worse. She was constructing a paper trail to have me declared incompetent, stripped of my rights, and confined permanently to a facility. Once institutionalized, any report I made about the theft would be dismissed as paranoid ravings of a senile old man. She had weaponized my age against me. I photographed every document, each page, each signature, each account number. Then I replaced the folders in their exact positions, sealed the floorboard flush, and verified no trace of my intrusion remained. I exited the bedroom, locked the door, and descended the back staircase in silence. Each step was agony, but I barely registered the pain. Celine was still asleep on the sofa. I settled into my recliner and placed my phone face down on the side table. That night, long after the impersonator retired upstairs, I sat alone in the darkness of my study. A single lamp illuminated the framed navigation chart of the South Atlantic that had hung on this wall since the day I retired. I replayed the last 14 months through the lens of what I now knew. The pattern was precise and methodical. The missing reading glasses that appeared in bizarre locations. The medication bottles rearranged so I would take the wrong dosage and appear confused at my next appointment. The calendar entries for doctor visits quietly shifted by a day, so I would arrive late, and Monica could sigh and tell the receptionist my memory was getting worse. She whispered to neighbors at church that she was worried about my mental state. She called Ethan on the satellite phone and gently suggested it was time to discuss long-term care. She built an invisible prison around me using nothing but lies, patience, and the universal assumption that old men inevitably lose their minds. I stood and walked to the small bathroom adjacent to the study. I turned on the light and looked at my reflection. The face staring back was lined and weathered, carved by 3 decades of salt wind. The skin beneath my eyes was dark with exhaustion. My shoulders were rounded from weeks of favoring my surgical scar. For one terrible moment, I asked myself the question she wanted everyone to ask. Was I wrong? Was my mind truly failing? Had I manufactured this conspiracy from fragments of a deteriorating brain? Then my eyes drifted to the navigation chart visible through the open door. I had plotted courses across every ocean using mathematics, a sextant, and the position of the stars. I had guided a 9,000-ton warship through a typhoon in the Philippine Sea without losing a single crew member. I had taught my son to find true north when every compass in the room was lying. My mind had never been sharper. The doubt evaporated like morning fog burning off the river. I turned off the light and returned to my recliner. I sat in the darkness, folded my hands across my chest, and made the decision that would determine the fate of everyone under this roof. She wanted the world to believe I was a confused old man, stumbling toward the end of his useful life. Very well. I would give her the performance she expected. I would shuffle and stammer and forget where I left my glasses. I would thank her for her kindness and apologize for being a burden. And while she watched her cameras and congratulated herself on the perfection of her trap, I would quietly dismantle every load-bearing wall of her conspiracy until the entire structure collapsed on top of her. But I could not do it alone. Every warship needs a battle group. I needed an ally who understood how to destroy an enemy using nothing but paperwork and the full weight of federal law. Every warship needs a battle group. No matter how skilled the navigator, you cannot win a war alone. You need destroyers to screen your flanks, submarines to strike from below, and a commanding officer on shore who can coordinate the entire operation from a position the enemy cannot reach. I needed someone who understood how to sink a conspiracy using nothing but legal precedent and the full crushing weight of federal authority. I waited until the following morning. The impersonator was in the kitchen preparing breakfast, moving with the rehearsed rhythm I had now learned to recognize as performance rather than genuine habit. I shuffled into the kitchen wearing my heavy wool cardigan and a pair of worn house slippers. I told her the physical therapist had recommended I start taking short, supervised walks as part of my spinal recovery. I said I wanted to try walking to the small park at the end of the street and sitting on a bench for 30 minutes. She looked up from the stove with an expression of exaggerated concern. "Are you sure that is wise, Bobby?" she asked, her voice dripping with the patronizing sweetness I had endured for 14 months. "What if you get confused and cannot find your way back?" I offered her a meek, defeated smile. I promised I would stay on the main sidewalk and turn around if I felt dizzy. She studied me for a long moment, likely weighing whether allowing the old man a brief outdoor excursion posed any risk to the operation. Apparently, she decided a confused retiree shuffling to a park bench was harmless. She told me to take my phone and call her if I needed help. I thanked her profusely, pulled on my overcoat, and stepped out the front door into the crisp Charleston morning. The moment the heavy door clicked shut behind me, the shuffling old man disappeared. I straightened my spine as far as the surgical scar would allow, and walked with purpose down the long driveway toward the street. I was not going to any park. I was heading to the office of Margaret Rawlings on Broad Street, in the heart of the Charleston Historic District. The walk was nearly 2 miles. For a healthy man, it would take 30 minutes. For a 67-year-old recovering from spinal surgery, every block was a negotiation between willpower and pain. The surgical scar burned along my lower back with each step, sending sharp currents down through my left hip and into my knee. I gripped my cane with white knuckles and kept moving. I had walked the narrow steel catwalks of warships in freezing North Atlantic gales. I could manage a sidewalk in South Carolina. The historic district opened before me like a living museum. Centuries old, live oaks, draped in Spanish moss, arched over the cobblestone streets. Iron gates guarded gardens bursting with jasmine and magnolia. The architecture was a testament to endurance. Beautiful structures that had survived wars, hurricanes, and the relentless erosion of time, because they were built on foundations that refused to yield. Margaret Rawlings operated her practice from one such structure, a meticulously restored federal-style townhouse on the corner of Broad and Church Street. Peggy, as everyone in Charleston's legal community called her, was 62 years old with silver hair cut sharply at her jawline and a reputation that made real estate developers physically uncomfortable. She had spent her entire career fighting to protect Charleston's historic properties from demolition and commercial exploitation. She had argued cases before the state Supreme Court and won landmark preservation rulings that were now taught in law schools. I had never hired Peggy before, but I knew her by reputation, and more importantly, I knew her by character. She was the daughter of a retired Navy chaplain. She understood military families. She understood what a house means when it has been held by the same bloodline for 4 generations. I climbed the 3 stone steps to her front door and pressed the brass bell. A young assistant opened the door and led me through a high-ceilinged foyer lined with original plaster moldings into a corner office overlooking a walled garden. Peggy was seated behind a massive antique desk covered in neatly stacked legal files. She wore a navy blue blazer over a white blouse, reading glasses perched low on her nose, and an expression of focused intensity that reminded me of a ship's captain studying a tactical display. She looked up as I entered, removed her glasses, and gestured to the leather chair across from her desk. She told me to sit down before I collapsed, because I looked like I had marched here from Fort Sumter. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I sat down, pulled my phone from my overcoat pocket, and placed it on her desk. I told her I needed her to look at something, and that I needed her to understand that what she was about to see involved the potential theft of a 4-generation military family estate, the financial destruction of an active-duty naval officer, and a coordinated attempt to have a competent 67-year-old man declared legally insane. Peggy put her glasses back on and picked up the phone. She swiped through the photographs in silence. I watched her face transform as she processed each image. The forged power of attorney drew a sharp intake of breath. The drained thrift savings plan statements made her jaw visibly tighten. The fabricated medical reports caused her nostrils to flare with barely controlled anger. But it was the architectural rendering of the boutique hotel that broke her professional composure entirely. She set the phone down on the desk and stared at the image of the Callahan house, with the antebellum columns marked for demolition and the magnolia garden replaced by a parking lot. Her face flushed a deep crimson. Her fingers pressed flat against the desktop so hard the tips turned white. "They want to turn a Callahan house into a cocktail lounge," she said. Her voice low and trembling, with a fury that went far beyond legal indignation. "This property is on the National Register Preliminary Survey List. It has been documented by the Historic Charleston Foundation. And this developer thinks he can gut it and serve martinis on the porch where your grandfather sat after surviving the Pacific?" She looked up at me, and her eyes were blazing. "Over my dead body, Mr. Callahan." I told her the situation was more complex than a preservation dispute. I explained that Monica's lover, Victor Kane, was a licensed real estate developer based in Miami who specialized in acquiring historic properties through fraudulent transactions. I told her about the impersonator currently living in my house, the surveillance cameras monitoring my movements, and the forged medical documents designed to have me committed before I could testify. Peggy listened without interrupting, her legal mind rapidly assembling the scattered evidence into a coherent prosecutorial framework. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers. "This is not a civil matter," she said firmly. This is federal. The forged power of attorney crosses into identity theft. The drained military retirement accounts constitute theft of federal benefits. And if they are planning to execute a fraudulent property sale using forged authorization documents, that is wire fraud the moment the funds transfer electronically. She paused and looked directly into my eyes. Your son is active duty Navy. His financial assets are protected under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. That means this falls squarely within the jurisdiction of the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. She reached for the phone on her desk. I have a contact at the NCIS field office in Charleston, she said. I am calling him right now. I watched her dial the number and felt something shift deep inside my chest. For the first time in 14 months, the crushing isolation that had pressed down on me since Monica began her campaign of manipulation lifted just enough for me to draw a full breath. I was no longer a solitary vessel navigating hostile waters. I had a battle group forming around me. Arming a torpedo is a precise and irreversible act. Once the warhead is live and the firing solution is locked, there is no recall. I sat in Peggy Rawlings' corner office and listened as she armed the legal equivalent of a guided weapon system aimed directly at the heart of Monica Callahan's conspiracy. The NCIS field agent's voice came through Peggy's desk phone on speaker. His name was Special Agent Decker, and he spoke with the clipped, efficient cadence of a man who had spent his career investigating crimes against military personnel. Peggy laid out the evidence methodically. The forged power of attorney, the systematic theft of an active-duty service member's thrift savings plan, the fraudulent property sale, the fabricated medical documents designed to incapacitate the primary witness. Agent Decker listened without interruption. When Peggy finished, he asked a single question. When is the property sale scheduled to close? I leaned forward. Based on the documents I found, the closing was arranged at a title company in Miami within 72 hours. Victor Kane's firm had already filed preliminary transfer paperwork with the Charleston County Register of Deeds. The final step required an electronic funds transfer from Kane Coastal Development into a designated escrow account, which would release the property title into Victor's name. Decker explained the tactical options. The simplest approach would be an emergency injunction freezing the property title immediately. This would block the sale and protect the house. The safe option. I shook my head. An injunction would alert Monica instantly. The moment the title company notified Victor that the sale was frozen, he would call Monica. She would realize the conspiracy was discovered. They would destroy digital evidence, abandon the impersonator, and flee the country. They had already drained nearly $800,000 from Ethan's retirement. That money was scattered across untraceable accounts. If we simply blocked the sale, we would save the house but lose everything else. Monica and Victor would vanish into the south of France with my son's stolen retirement and face no consequences. I told Decker I did not want to stop them from jumping off the cliff. I wanted to let them jump, but move the ground before they landed. Decker spoke slowly. He said, if we allowed the sale to proceed, the electronic funds transfer would constitute federal wire fraud. The instant money crossed the banking network, combined with the forged power of attorney and theft of military benefits, the completed transaction would give federal jurisdiction over an international fraud case carrying a mandatory minimum of 15 years. But we needed to control where the money landed. If the funds reached Monica's hidden accounts, cash would fragment into untraceable shells within hours. We needed a trap that looked like a successful robbery from inside but was actually a sealed cage. Decker proposed a shadow intercept. His team would coordinate with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division to insert a digital redirect at the banking clearinghouse level. When Victor's firm initiated the wire transfer, funds would appear to process normally. Victor would receive a confirmation code. His banking application would display a successful transaction. Monica would believe the house was sold, but the funds would never reach their accounts. The transfer would be silently rerouted into a frozen federal escrow account controlled jointly by NCIS and the FBI. Every dollar captured, documented, and held as evidence of completed wire fraud. Peggy added a second layer. As a preservation attorney, she had legal standing to file an emergency historic preservation order with the Charleston County Circuit Court. This would designate the Callahan estate as a protected historic structure under South Carolina law. Regardless of who held the title, the building could never be demolished, altered, or converted to commercial use without approval from the Historic Preservation Commission. Even if the federal intercept failed, Victor's investment would be worthless. He would own a property he could never develop. The boutique hotel, the cocktail terrace, the parking lot replacing my wife's magnolia garden would never exist. Peggy would make certain of it. Decker instructed Peggy to draft a sworn federal affidavit for my signature. The document would declare the power of attorney a forgery, confirm I never authorized the property sale, and legally authorize the shadow intercept. Peggy's printer produced a thick stack of pages bearing official seals of both NCIS and the FBI. She spread them across her antique desk and handed me her heavy silver fountain pen. She told me this was the point of no return. Once I signed, the trap was armed and could not be disarmed. The moment Victor pressed confirm on that wire transfer, his life and Monica's life would be effectively over. I took the pen without hesitation. I signed my name on every page with slow, deliberate strokes. The same signature Monica had forged to steal my home was now sealing her destruction. Dark blue ink against heavy cream paper. Each letter formed by a hand that had charted courses across oceans and never deviated from true north. Peggy scanned the signed documents and transmitted them to Decker's secure server. 3 minutes later, her computer chimed with confirmation. The federal intercept was live. The escrow account was armed. Peggy looked at me with solemn resolve. She told me the hardest part was beginning. I had to return home and walk past the woman in my living room. I had to let her patronize me, disrespect me, and monitor me through hidden cameras. Every second I kept her comfortable was another second closer to the closing date when Victor would unknowingly transfer his money into a federal cage. I stood from the chair. My spine protested, but I kept my posture straight. I thanked Peggy for her ferocity and precision. She walked me to the front door and gripped my hand firmly. "Bring that house home, Mr. Callahan," she said. 4 generations deserve better than a parking lot. I stepped onto Broad Street. Late afternoon sun cast long amber shadows across the cobblestones. The walk home stretched before me like a return voyage through enemy waters. I had armed the torpedo. Now I had to navigate back into hostile territory and convince everyone aboard that the old navigator was still sleeping at his post. The most dangerous moment of any covert operation is the return to hostile territory. You have gathered your intelligence, coordinated your strike, and armed your weapons. But none of it matters if the enemy detects you before the trap is sprung. I walked up the driveway of my own home, knowing that a single misplaced word could detonate the entire plan. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped into the foyer. The hallway was dark. The television in the living room was silent. The house felt charged with a volatile, unstable energy that prickled against my skin. Celine was standing in the center of the hallway. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest. Her mobile phone was clenched in her right hand, the screen glowing against her white knuckles. The relaxed, pleasant demeanor she had maintained for the past 2 days was completely gone. Her jaw was locked. Her breathing was rapid and shallow. She looked like a caged animal that had just realized the door to its enclosure had been left open and was trying to decide whether to run or attack. "Where have you been?" she demanded. Her voice was sharp and nasal, stripped of the warm musical cadence she had been imitating. "A walk to the park does not take 4 hours, Bobby. 4 hours." The panic in her voice was genuine. She was not worried about my health. She was terrified that her sister's carefully constructed operation was unraveling. If I had gone somewhere unexpected, spoken to someone, or done anything outside the predictable pattern that Monica monitored through her cameras, the entire conspiracy could be compromised. Celine's only job was to keep me visible, docile, and controlled. She had failed, and she knew Monica would hold her accountable. I leaned heavily against the door frame, letting my shoulders collapse inward. I widened my eyes and allowed my lower lip to tremble slightly, projecting the bewildered expression of a man who had lost his way and was deeply ashamed of it. I told her I was terribly sorry. I explained that I had walked to the park as planned, but then became confused about which direction was home. I said I sat on a bench for a long time watching the birds because I could not remember the name of my street. A kind woman eventually asked if I was lost and helped me find my way back. The lie was deliberately pathetic, designed to sound exactly like the kind of humiliating episode that would confirm Monica's narrative of my cognitive decline. Celine studied my face with narrow, suspicious eyes. She was not convinced. Her thumb hovered over the phone screen, and I could see the contact name displayed in bright letters. Monica. She took a step toward me. I was 2 seconds away from calling your daughter-in-law, she said through clenched teeth. I was about to tell her you wandered off and I could not find you. Do you understand how worried I have been? My chest constricted. If she pressed that call button, Monica would receive a message that would instantly trigger a cascade of catastrophic consequences. Monica would assume I had gone to the police or spoken to a lawyer. She would contact Victor Kane immediately. Victor would cancel the property closing scheduled for the next 72 hours. The wire transfer would never happen. The federal shadow intercept would catch nothing. NCIS and the FBI would have evidence of conspiracy but no completed crime. Monica and Victor would flee the country, and Peggy's historic preservation order would protect an empty house while my son remained bankrupt. I had to stop her from making that call. I could not use force. I could not reveal what I knew. I had to exploit the only vulnerability I had observed in this woman since the moment I identified her as an impersonator. Her greed. I let out a long, exaggerated sigh and shuffled past her into the living room. I lowered myself onto the edge of the sofa with a heavy groan and rubbed my temples with trembling fingers. I told her she was absolutely right to be upset. I apologized again and said the truth was that I had not gone to the park at all. I confessed that I had lied because I was embarrassed. Her posture shifted almost imperceptibly. The rigid hostility in her shoulders softened by a single degree. I continued speaking in a low, halting voice, telling her I had actually taken the bus downtown to visit my old bank. I said I had wanted to do something on my own without feeling like a helpless burden, and I was too proud to admit I needed supervision for a simple errand. The word bank landed exactly where I aimed it. Her grip on the phone loosened. The aggressive set of her jaw relaxed slightly. Her eyes, which seconds ago were filled with panic, now flickered with a different light entirely. Curiosity. Calculation. Hunger. I reached into the breast pocket of my cardigan and pulled out my leather checkbook. I held it in my trembling hands and looked up at her with an expression of profound, misguided affection. I told her that over the past months, I had come to realize how much she sacrificed to care for a sick old man. I said I knew my mind was failing and that soon I would probably need to move to a facility where professionals could manage my condition. I opened the checkbook and placed it on my knee. I told her I had closed a small savings account from my Navy days, and before I lost the ability to make my own decisions, I wanted to show my gratitude to the devoted daughter-in-law who had given up her life to nurse me. I wrote the date. I wrote the name Monica Callahan on the pay line, knowing Celine possessed whatever forged identification was necessary to cash it. I wrote the amount. $15,000. I spelled it out carefully on the legal line, keeping my handwriting deliberately shaky but legible. I tore the check free and held it out toward her. The war on her face lasted less than 5 seconds. The cautious conspirator who knew she should report my absence to Monica fought against the desperate woman who lived in a rented apartment and drove a car that smelled of stale cigarettes. $15,000 was more money than she had likely seen in a single year. It was cash, handed directly to her by a foolish old man who was practically begging her to take it. Greed won. It always does when the stakes are low enough for the thief to rationalize. She lowered her phone. Her thumb slid away from Monica's contact. She reached out and took the check from my fingers with a quickness that betrayed her hunger. A wide, genuine smile broke across her face as she read the numbers. She told me I was far too generous. She promised not to tell anyone about my little trip downtown. Our secret, she said, folding the check carefully and sliding it into the pocket of her yoga pants. I thanked her and told her I was going upstairs to rest. She nodded eagerly, her mind already consumed by the $15,000 pressed against her thigh. As I climbed the staircase, gripping the banister with manufactured frailty, I felt a cold, dark satisfaction settle into my bones. She thought she had robbed a helpless old man. She did not realize the check was a signed confession. The moment she walked into a bank and attempted to cash it, the transaction would be flagged, documented, and transmitted directly to NCIS. It would prove she was not a passive bystander, but a paid accomplice who had accepted money under a stolen identity while actively participating in the imprisonment and defrauding of a federal retiree. I had just handed her the anchor that would drag her to the bottom of the ocean. The phone rang at 2:47 in the morning. I know the exact minute because I had been staring at the ceiling for hours, running calculations in my head the way I used to run them on a navigation chart: distance, bearing, time to intercept. Sleep was not an option. My back ached from the staircase climb earlier that evening, and the Percocet sat untouched on the nightstand because I needed my mind sharper than it had been in years. Pain was a luxury I could not afford. The satellite number glowed on the screen. I pressed the green button before the second ring. "Dad!" Ethan's voice was stripped down to its bones. No rank, no composure, no lieutenant commander polish, just a son calling his father in the dark. I can't stop looking at that screenshot. I eased myself upright against the headboard, biting down on the bolt of pain that shot through my lower spine. "Tell me what you see." "I see my wife kissing another man in a cabana. I see a 2-carat ring I put on her finger 4 years ago catching sunlight, while her hand is on someone else's chest." He paused. I could hear the low hum of the carrier's ventilation system behind him, the kind of white noise that becomes your entire world when you are 5,000 miles from home. "And I see you telling me to wait, so I'm waiting. But I need to know why." I had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times since leaving Peggy Rawlings's office. Every version ended with me telling Ethan the full truth: the forged power of attorney, the drained retirement accounts, the demolition blueprints. But the full truth was a depth charge, and if I dropped it now, Ethan would do what any betrayed husband with a warrior's training would do. He would act. He would request emergency leave. He would fly home. And the moment Monica detected the slightest change in the current, she and Victor Kane would vanish with $775,000 of my son's future. So I lied. "Partially. I had lunch with her yesterday," I said, keeping my voice at the slow, measured pace of a man reporting weather conditions. She seemed distracted. I noticed a few things that didn't add up, small things, the kind of details most people wouldn't catch. "I'm following them." "What kind of details?" "The kind I'm not ready to share until I've confirmed a bearing. You taught me that, remember? Never call a contact until you've got 3 returns on the scope." Silence. Then a breath that was almost a laugh. "You're quoting my own sonar, training back at me. Because it applies. I need 72 hours, Ethan. 3 days. Can you give me that?" The ventilation hum filled the gap. I imagined him sitting on the edge of his rack in the narrow berthing compartment, elbows on his knees, staring at the steel deck. I knew that posture. I had held it myself 40 years ago on a destroyer in the South China Sea, the night I received a Red Cross message that my father had suffered a stroke and I could not get home for 11 days. 72 hours, he said finally, not 73. Understood. "Dad, is the house safe?" The question carried more weight than he intended. The house was a Callahan landmark, built by his great-grandfather, with timber salvaged from a decommissioned naval vessel in 1945. 4 generations of our family had been born under that roof. Its columns were hand-carved. Its foundation was Charleston tabby, oyster shell, and lime, older than the city's modern grid. Monica and Victor Kane planned to tear it all down and pour a concrete slab for a boutique hotel lobby. "The house is safe," I said. And I meant it in every sense. "Okay." Another pause. "I love you." "I love you too, son. Now get some rack time. I'll handle the navigation from here." The call ended. I set the phone on the nightstand beside the untouched Percocet and pressed both palms flat against the mattress, letting the silence resettle around me like water closing over a hull. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from the weight of what I was carrying alone. A forged legal document. A stolen retirement fund. A woman sleeping 2 doors down, who was not my daughter-in-law. A 72-hour window that had already begun to shrink. I reached for the leather-bound notebook I kept beside the bed. The same model I had used for 30 years to log celestial observations at sea. I opened it to a blank page and wrote the date at the top. Below it, I listed every variable in the operation. Shadow intercept. Armed. Federal escrow. Active. Historic preservation order. Filed. Celine. Neutralized via the $15,000 check. Now, a traceable thread. Monica. Unaware. Currently in Miami. With Victor Kane. Estimated return. Thursday afternoon. Closing date for the fraudulent sale. Friday. 11 a.m. I stared at the list. In navigation, you plot your own ship's position, and then you plot the positions of every vessel in the area, friendly, hostile, and unknown. You calculate their courses, their speeds, and the moment their tracks will converge with yours. That moment is called the closest point of approach. Our CPA was Friday morning. 48 hours and change. I closed the notebook and placed it under the mattress. Between the box spring and the frame, in a cavity I had discovered when I was 12 years old and used to hide comic books from my older brother. Some hiding places outlast the people who created them. The house was silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the downstairs foyer. The one my father had brought back from a port call in Hamburg in 1953. Each tick was a countdown. Each talk was a reminder that Monica believed she was running out the clock on a helpless old man who could barely walk to the mailbox. She had miscounted. I turned off the lamp and lay flat on my back, eyes open in the darkness, mapping the next 48 hours the way I once mapped passages through the Strait of Hormuz. Narrow, dangerous, zero margin for error. Somewhere below me, Celine slept with a $15,000 check in her purse. Unaware it was an anchor. Somewhere across the Atlantic, my son lay awake on an aircraft carrier, trusting his father to hold the line. And somewhere in Miami, Monica Callahan was enjoying her last vacation as a free woman. I folded my hands across my chest and began to count the ticks of the Hamburg clock, converting each one into a waypoint on a course I intended to sail without deviation. 48 hours. Dead reckoning. I woke at 5:15. Not because I had slept well, but because 30 years in the Navy had wired my body to rise before the sun, regardless of what the night had taken from me. The pain in my lower back had settled into a deep, grinding ache, the kind that tells you the hardware the surgeon bolted to your vertebrae is doing its job, but wants you to know about it. I swung my legs off the mattress, planted both feet on the cold hardwood, and sat motionless for a full minute, listening. The Hamburg clock ticked below. A mockingbird sang outside the east window. And somewhere on the first floor, a floorboard creaked once, softly followed by the faint click of a cabinet door closing. Celine was already awake. I reached under the mattress and confirmed the notebook was undisturbed, then pulled on a flannel robe and shuffled toward the hallway with the exaggerated stiffness of a man 10 years older than I actually was. The performance had to be seamless now. Every gesture, every wince, every pause on the staircase landing had to reinforce the portrait Monica had been painting for 14 months. A deteriorating widower losing his grip on reality, one confused morning at a time. I gripped the banister and descended the stairs with theatrical slowness, letting my slippers scuff each tread so Celine would hear me coming. She was in the kitchen when I arrived, standing at the island with her back to me, scrolling through her phone with her right hand, while the coffee machine burbled beside her. Right hand. Left-handed Monica would have held the phone in her left. The detail was a splinter I could not stop touching. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice at the gentle, slightly bewildered register I had been rehearsing. She turned and smiled. It was a good smile, warm, practiced, almost convincing. "Morning, Bobby. How did you sleep?" "Oh, you know. The back kept me up some. I thought I heard the phone ring in the middle of the night, but maybe I dreamed it." I watched her eyes. There it was, a micro flicker, a tightening at the outer corners that lasted less than a second. She had heard the satellite call. She had been awake at 2:47. The question was whether she had listened at my door. And if so, how much she had caught through 2 inches of Carolina pine. "Probably a dream," she said, pouring coffee into my navy mug, the one with the chipped anchor on the side. "You've been having a lot of those lately." "Have I?" I accepted the mug with both hands, letting them tremble slightly. "I suppose I have." She studied me the way a card player studies an opponent after a raise, looking for the tell. The involuntary signal that reveals whether the bet is real or a bluff. I gave her nothing. 30 years of standing on a bridge wing in front of junior officers who needed to believe their navigator was calm had taught me how to keep my face as flat as a chart table. After breakfast, scrambled eggs she overcooked and toast she underbuttered. Another deviation from Monica's habits that I catalogued without comment. I announced that I wanted to sit on the front porch and watch the street. It was the kind of harmless, elderly request that fit her image of me perfectly. And she agreed with the relieved enthusiasm of a jailer whose prisoner has asked to stay in his cell. The porch was my observation post. I settled into the rocking chair my wife, Eleanor, had bought at a flea market in Beaufort the year before she died, and I began my watch. The street unfolded before me in its usual Wednesday rhythm. Mrs. Delacroix walking her arthritic beagle at 7:10, the FedEx truck making its first pass at 7:42, the Henderson's landscaping crew arriving at 8:15 with a trailer of mulch. I logged each one mentally, establishing the baseline pattern, because what I needed to detect was the anomaly, the vehicle that did not belong, the face that appeared twice, the movement that broke the rhythm. It came at 9:23. A silver Lexus LC 500 turned onto Broad Street from the East End, moving slowly, too slowly for someone who knew where they were going, too deliberately for someone who was lost. The windows were tinted beyond the legal limit for South Carolina, which meant the driver did not care about traffic stops, which meant the driver had either money or arrogance or both. The car passed my house without stopping, continued to the dead end at the river, turned around, and passed again. On the second pass, the passenger window lowered 2 inches, just enough for a phone camera to capture the front of the property. I kept rocking. I kept my eyes on the mockingbird in the magnolia tree as though I had not noticed a thing. But inside the leather notebook of my mind, I recorded the plate number by converting each character into its NATO phonetic equivalent, the way I had done for 3 decades. Victor O Kilo Niner, 3 A Papa Delta Foxtrot. Victor. The first letter. I did not believe in coincidence. I believed in patterns, and the pattern told me that Victor Kane, or someone working for him, was surveilling the property ahead of Friday's closing. They wanted to confirm the asset was intact. The old man was docile, and the path to the signature was clear. I let the Lexus disappear around the corner, then reached into my robe pocket and sent a single text to Peggy Rawlings from the prepaid phone she had given me yesterday. Silver Lexus LC 500. VK93 PDF. 2 passes. Photo recon. Her reply arrived in under a minute. Logged. NCIS notified. Stay in character. Stay in character. As if I had ever left it. By noon, I had mapped the full perimeter of the operation from my rocking chair. The Lexus had made one more pass at 11:05. A woman I did not recognize, mid-30s, dark blazer, clipboard, had walked past the house on foot at 10:30, pausing to photograph the historical plaque beside the front gate. And Celine had checked on me 4 times through the screen door, each visit spaced exactly 45 minutes apart, which told me she was operating on a schedule someone else had written. 3 contacts, 3 bearings, a triangle. In navigation, when you have 3 bearings that converge on a single point, you have a fix, a confirmed position. And my fix told me that this house was being watched from multiple angles by multiple people, all feeding information back to the same source. Monica was not improvising. She was running an operation, and she had done it before. I finished my coffee, cold now, and set the mug on the porch railing beside a pot of Eleanor's roses that Celine had forgotten to water. The petals were beginning to curl at the edges, drying out from neglect. I made a mental note to water them myself after dark, when no one was watching, because some things deserve to survive the people who fail to care for them. 40 hours to closing. The perimeter was drawn. The contacts were plotted. And the old man in the rocking chair had seen everything. The clipboard woman returned at 2:15. I was still on the porch, rocking in Eleanor's chair with a copy of the Charleston Post and Courier spread across my lap like a blanket. I had not read a single word. The newspaper was a prop. The same way a darkened bridge wing is a prop that tells the enemy you are not watching, when in fact every scope on your ship is painting them in green light. She walked from the east this time, reversing her morning route, wearing the same dark blazer but carrying a leather portfolio instead of a clipboard. She paused at the historical plaque again, and this time she did not photograph it. She read it. Her lips moved as she traced the engraved words with her index finger. Callahan House, circa 1945. Constructed by Chief Petty Officer William Callahan, with timber from the decommissioned USS Raleigh. Then she looked directly at me. I raised my coffee mug in a neighborly salute. She nodded once, turned, and continued walking toward the river. I tracked her reflection in the glass of the front door until she disappeared around the hedge at the corner of the property. Whoever she was not a tourist. Tourists do not read historical plaques twice in one day, and they do not swap their accessories between visits. She was cataloging the property, its heritage value, its structural features, its vulnerabilities. She was Victor Kane's appraiser, and she was building the case that the house could be demolished without triggering a preservation challenge. What she did not know was that Peggy Rawlings had filed the Historic Preservation Order with the Charleston Board of Architectural Review at 9 o'clock that morning. The house was now legally untouchable. Even if Victor Kane completed the purchase on Friday, he could not change a single nail without the board's approval, and the board had not approved a demolition in the historic district since 1987. One mine planted. Waiting for the hull, I folded the newspaper and went inside. Celine was in the living room, seated on the sofa with her legs tucked beneath her in a position Monica never used. Monica sat cross-legged on the floor when she was relaxed, a habit from 10 years of yoga that had restructured her hips. Celine sat like a woman who had never held a downward dog in her life. Another bearing. Another confirmation. "I'm going to lie down for a bit," I announced, letting my voice carry the weight of an old man defeated by an afternoon. The porch wore me out. "Of course, Bobby. Do you want me to bring your medication up?" "No, thank you. I'll just rest." She smiled and returned to her phone. I climbed the stairs at half my actual speed, gripping the banister with a white-knuckled performance of frailty, and closed my bedroom door behind me. Then I moved. I retrieved the prepaid phone from behind the loose baseboard beneath the radiator, the same hiding spot where I had kept a shortwave receiver in 1971 when I was 16 and obsessed with intercepting Coast Guard frequencies. The phone had one new message from Peggy. "Preservation order confirmed. Board notified. Kane's office has not yet been informed. NCIS requests you check for electronic surveillance in the house. Agent Decker believes Kane may have devices beyond the cameras you already identified. Look for audio. Frequencies between 900 MHz and 2.4 GHz. Audio surveillance. The thought settled into my chest like cold water. I sat on the edge of the bed and considered the problem. I did not have a spectrum analyzer or a frequency scanner. What I had was a 40-year-old Zenith transoceanic shortwave radio that my father had given me the week before I shipped out to Annapolis a graduation gift. He called the only honest voice you will ever find. The radio was on the top shelf of my closet, behind a box of Eleanor's winter scarves I had never been able to give away. I pulled it down, wiped the dust from the leather case, and extended the antenna. The Zenith was analog, no digital tuning, no presets. You swept the dial by hand and you listened with your ears. The way navigators used to listen for signal buoys in fog before GPS turned seamanship into a video game. I had spent hundreds of hours on mid-watches sweeping frequencies for navigation beacons, weather stations, and the occasional ghost signal that turned out to be a submarine broadcasting on a channel it was not supposed to use. Ghost frequencies. That was what I needed to find. I powered on the Zenith and began a slow sweep from 800 megahertzes upward. Static. Hiss. The crackle of a taxi dispatcher on a shared band. More static. At 915 megahertzes, I caught it, a faint, rhythmic pulse that did not belong to any commercial broadcast. It was a heartbeat signal, the kind that a wireless microphone transmits when it is in standby mode, waiting to be activated. I moved the antenna slowly, watching the signal strength rise and fall, triangulating the source. The same way I had once triangulated Soviet radar emitters from the bridge of a cruiser in the Barents Sea. The signal was strongest when I pointed the antenna at the floor directly toward the living room below. I swept higher. At 1.3 gigahertzes, I found a second pulse. This one was coming from the direction of the kitchen, and at 2.412 gigahertzes, a third buried in the noise floor of the house's Wi-Fi router, camouflaged inside legitimate traffic so that a casual scan would dismiss it as network chatter. 3 audio devices. 3 rooms. Every conversation in this house was being recorded and transmitted to someone outside. I wrote the frequencies in my notebook. 915 megahertzes, 1.3 gigahertzes, 2.412 gigahertzes. Below them I wrote 3 ears. Living room, kitchen, router asked. Kane is listening. The implications reorganized themselves in my mind like waypoints on a new course. Every word I had spoken to Celine, the confused Oljomen routine, the breakfast conversations, the gentle requests had been heard by Victor Kane, which meant Kane believed exactly what I wanted him to believe. That Bobby Callahan was a declining, disoriented widower who posed no threat to the Friday closing. But it also meant that the phone call with Ethan at 2:47 might have been compromised. I had taken the call in my bedroom. If there was a 4th device up here that the Zenith could not reach from this angle, then Kane knew Ethan was suspicious. And if Kane knew that, the entire operation was balanced on a wire thinner than I had calculated. I needed to sweep my own bedroom. I adjusted the antenna and began a final pass, moving degree by degree across the walls, the ceiling, the window frames. The static held steady. No pulse, no heartbeat. The bedroom was clean, either because Kane had not managed to plant a device in a room I rarely left, or because Celine had not yet found an opportunity to place one while I was out of the house. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. The bedroom was a safe harbor. Everything else was hostile water. I powered off the Zenith, returned it to the closet behind Eleanor's scarves, and sat in the silence of the room, calculating. Kane had ears in 3 rooms. I had confirmation that those ears heard only what I chose to say. The confused old man was still the confused old man, and that was the most dangerous weapon in this house. 36 hours to closing. I picked up the prepaid phone and typed one message to Peggy. 3 bugs confirmed. 915. 1,000, 300, 2,000, 412. Bedroom clean. The channel is still ours. Her reply came in 11 seconds. Copy. Decker says do not remove the devices. Let them listen. Feed them what we want them to hear. I smiled in the dark. In the Navy, We called that a deception broadcast, transmitting false information on a frequency you knew the enemy was monitoring, leading them to a position where your torpedoes were already waiting. Tomorrow, I would give Victor Kane the broadcast of his life. I woke Thursday morning with a script in my head, not written down. I could not risk paper in a house with 3 sets of electronic ears and a woman whose job was to watch me unravel. The script lived in my memory, the way navigation waypoints lived there during my years at sea. Precise, sequential, and rehearsed until the words felt less like language and more like coordinates on a chart I had drawn 1,000 times. The sun came through the east window at 6:12. I lay still for 3 minutes, running the script from beginning to end, testing each line for weakness, the way a helmsman tests a rudder before entering a narrow channel. Satisfied, I swung my legs off the bed, winced for the benefit of no one force of habit now, and began the most important performance of my life. I dressed slowly. Flannel shirt, khaki trousers 1 size too large, leather slippers that scuffed the hardwood with every step. The costume of decline. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror and saw exactly what Victor Kane needed to see. A stooped, gray man shuffling toward the kitchen with the cautious gait of someone who had forgotten why he was walking, but was too proud to stop. Celine was at the island, pouring orange juice, right hand on the carton, phone face-down on the counter, screen glowing through the case she had been texting. I noted the time, 6:21. Monica's daily check-in, most likely, or Kane's morning brief. Good morning, Bobby. The same practiced warmth. The same counterfeit smile. Morning, sweetheart. I eased into the kitchen chair and let out a long theatrical sigh. I had the strangest dream last night. She set the juice in front of me. Oh, what about? Here it began. I dreamed Eleanor was standing in the garden, I said, letting my voice drift into the soft, unfocused register of a man caught between memory and confusion. She was wearing that blue dress she wore to Ethan's commissioning ceremony, and she told me I needed to sign something. Some kind of paper. I can't remember what it was. I watched Celine's shoulders. They tightened barely, a 1/4-inch lift, and then relaxed. She turned to face me with an expression of gentle concern that was 3 degrees too interested for a casual dream story. A paper? What kind of paper? I don't know. Something about the house. Maybe. Eleanor kept saying it was important, that I needed to take care of it before. I let the sentence dissolve into a shrug and sipped the juice. Celine picked up her phone. The movement was subtle. A thummy swipe under the counter, angled away from me, but I saw it. She was relaying the information in real time. Bobby dreamed about signing something. Bobby is confused. Bobby is ready. Good. Let them hear what they needed to hear. I spent the next 90 minutes feeding the microphones a carefully constructed narrative of cognitive decline. During breakfast, I called Celine by Eleanor's name twice, correcting myself each time with a bewildered apology. I asked her whether the lawyer had called about the papers, a vague reference I left deliberately unfinished, allowing Kane to interpret it as Bobby's dim awareness of the documents Monica intended to present at Friday's closing. I stood at the kitchen window and commented that the magnolia tree looked different, as though someone had moved it, which was the kind of spatial disorientation the fabricated medical reports described. Each line was a depth charge set to a specific pressure. Each confused remark was a false signal transmitted on the frequency I knew the enemy was monitoring. At 9:45, I escalated. Monica, I said, fumbling the name switch with what I hoped was convincing clumsiness. Did I already take my morning pills? I can't remember. She looked at me with something that might have been pity if it had not been calculated. You took them 20 minutes ago, Bobby. Remember? I handed them to you with your toast. Did you? I rubbed my forehead. I'm sorry. Things get foggy sometimes. It's okay. It's completely normal. Normal. The word sat in my stomach like a stone. This woman, this stranger, sleeping in my son's bed, wearing my daughter-in-law's face, was telling me that the disintegration of my mind was normal. And somewhere out there, Victor Kane was listening to this exchange and updating his assessment. The old man is deteriorating on schedule. The closing will proceed without resistance. I wanted to stand up, look directly into whatever device was hidden in the kitchen, and tell Kane exactly what was coming for him. I wanted to recite the case number of the federal wiry fraud complaint, the docket reference of the historic preservation order, and the name of the NCIS agent who would be waiting at the title company on Friday morning. The impulse burned in my throat like bile, but a navigator does not reveal his course to a hostile vessel. He maintains his heading, holds his speed, and lets the geometry do the killing. So I swallowed the impulse along with the last of the orange juice, and I asked Celine whether she could help me find my reading glasses, which were on top of my head. She found them for me with a patient smile. I thanked her with the gratitude of a man who believed he was losing himself. And in the living room, in the kitchen, and buried inside the Wi-Fi signal that carried our words into Victor Kane's earpiece, the deception broadcast continued steady, convincing, and lethal. By noon, I had delivered every line of the script. The confused old man had called his daughter Winelaw by his dead wife's name. He had forgotten his medication. He had muddled the details of a dream about signing papers. He had lost his glasses on his own head, and he had asked, twice, when the nice young man from the bank was coming to help him sort out the house situation, a phrase so perfectly aligned with Monica's plan that Kane would read it as confirmation that Bobby Callahan was not only willing to sign the property transfer but was actively expecting it. The broadcast was complete. The false signal was in the water, and Kane's torpedoes, I was certain, were now aimed at a position where my ship had never been. I sat on the porch in Eleanor's rocking chair, watched the street for the silver Lexus. It did not appear, which meant Kane was satisfied with what he had heard and no longer needed visual confirmation, and allowed myself a single moment of stillness. 24 hours. Tomorrow morning, Monica would return from Miami. She would bring the documents. She would sit across from me at the kitchen table and ask for my signature with the same smile Celine had been rehearsing all week. And I would give her exactly what she expected, a trembling, confused old man reaching for a pen. What she would not expect was everything that happened after. I closed my eyes and listened to the mockingbird in the magnolia tree. The same bird that had been singing since Tuesday. The only honest voice left on this frequency. 24 hours. One last watch. Dead reckoning. She arrived at 7:42 on Friday morning. I heard the car before I saw it. A black Escalade, with tinted windows pulling into the driveway with the quiet authority of a hearse. The engine idled for 90 seconds before the rear passenger door opened. Monica stepped out wearing a cream linen blazer, tailored slacks and sunglasses that cost more than most people's mortgage payments. Her hair was pulled back in a low chignon, and the 2-carat ring Ethan had placed on her finger 4 years ago caught the Carolina sun like a small, cold star. She looked rested. She looked confident. She looked like a woman who had spent the last 72 hours in a Miami resort suite with a man who was not her husband and had returned home without a single crease of guilt on her face. I watched from the upstairs window, standing 3 feet back from the glass so my silhouette would not register against the curtain. The driver, male, mid-40s, gray suit. No tie, remained in the Escalade. He did not get out. He did not open her door. He sat with both hands on the wheel, engine running, like a getaway driver who expected the job to take less than an hour. Monica walked to the front door, and Celine opened it before she knocked. They did not embrace. They did not speak, at least not loud enough for me to hear through the floor. But I heard footsteps moving toward the kitchen, the low murmur of 2 voices calibrating their frequencies, and then the sharp, decisive sound of a briefcase clasp being opened. The documents had arrived. I gave them 4 minutes. Long enough to arrange whatever they needed to arrange. Short enough to suggest I had not been watching. Then I shuffled down the stairs with my full repertoire of frailty. The stiff grip on the banister. The pause on the landing to catch my breath, the final descent into the foyer, with the bewildered expression of a man who had heard voices and could not remember whether he had invited guests. Monica was standing in the kitchen. Celine had vanished, retreated to the living room or the back porch or wherever understudies go when the lead actress takes the stage. The kitchen table was set with a white linen placemat, a cup of fresh coffee, and a neat stack of documents in a dark blue folder, embossed with gold lettering. Pearson and Associates Real Estate and Asset Management. Monica turned to face me, and for the first time in months I was looking at the real woman, not her substitute. The difference was immediate and visceral. Monica moved with a dancer's economy, each gesture intentional, each shift of weight deliberate. Her left hand held the coffee pot. Her watch was on her right wrist. She smelled of jasmine and something darker underneath, a bass note of ambition that no perfume could mask. "Bobby," she said, and her voice was warm in the way that expensive cashmere is warm, soft on the surface, manufactured underneath. "How are you feeling this morning?" "A little foggy," I said, settling into the kitchen chair with an audible groan. "Celine, Monica. I keep mixing up the names." I looked at her with practiced confusion. "Were you here yesterday?" "I thought you were here yesterday." A flicker behind the sunglasses, which she had not yet removed indoors. She was scanning me, comparing what she saw against whatever report Celine had provided and whatever Kane had relayed from the audio surveillance. The confused old man, the dream about signing papers, the forgotten medication, the glasses on his own head. She removed the sunglasses and placed them on the counter. Her eyes were dark brown, steady, and utterly without mercy. "I was here yesterday, Bobby. I'm here every day." "Remember?" "Of course. Of course you are." I reached for the coffee with both hands, letting them tremble against the ceramic. "I'm sorry. The surgery, the medication things get mixed up." "I know." She sat across from me and opened the blue folder with the practiced fluidity of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times. "Bobby, I need to talk to you about something important. It's about the house." "The house?" "Yes. I've been speaking with a financial advisor, a very respected firm, about securing your future. Your medical costs are going to increase, and Ethan's deployment makes it difficult for him to manage things from overseas." She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "This is a simple authorization that allows me to work with the advisor on your behalf. It protects you. It protects Ethan. It protects the house." I looked at the document. My vision was perfect. The surgeon who repaired my spine had no jurisdiction over my eyes, but I squinted at the page and held it at arm's length, tilting it toward the window light as though the words were swimming. The document was a durable general power of attorney, identical in structure to the forged version I had found under the floorboard in the master bedroom closet. But this one was clean, unsigned, notarized with a blank witness line, and bearing the letterhead of a law firm I had never heard of. Kessler, Brandt, and Whitmore, LLC. Below the legal boilerplate, in a paragraph so dense with jargon that most people would skim past it, was the operative clause: full and irrevocable authority over all real property, financial accounts, medical decisions, and legal proceedings belonging to Robert James Callahan. Everything. She wanted everything. And at the bottom of the page, a signature line waited for me like an open grave. "I don't have my reading glasses," I said, patting my shirt pocket. They were on top of my head. I did not reach for them. Monica produced a pen from the briefcase, a Mont Blanc with a black barrel and gold clip, the kind of pen that costs $400 and is designed to make the act of signing feel like a privilege rather than a surrender. She placed it beside the document and aligned it parallel to the edge of the paper with the precision of a woman who understood that presentation was half the con. "Take your time, Bobby. There's no rush. No rush." The Escalade was idling in the driveway with the engine running. Kane was listening through 3 microphones. Celine was somewhere in the house, ready to witness. And Monica sat across from me with her hands folded on the table, patient as a spider at the center of a web she had spent 14 months weaving. I picked up the Mont Blanc. It was heavier than I expected, weighted at the base for balance, engineered for smooth, decisive strokes. A pen built for people who sign things that change the world. I held it over the signature line and let my hand hover. "Bobby," Monica said softly. "It's just a signature." I looked up at her. For 1 second, no longer, I let the mask slip. Not the confused old man, not the declining widower. I let her see the navigator, the man who had guided warships through uncharted waters for 30 years without losing a single vessel, the man who could read a storm from the color of the horizon and calculate a torpedo's track from the sound of its propeller. 1 second. Then the mask returned, and I was Bobby again, foggy, grateful, reaching for the pen like a child, reaching for a hand he trusted. "You're right," I said. "It's just a signature." I lowered the pen to the paper. The tip of the Mont Blanc touched the signature line, and I let it rest there for 3 full seconds without moving. 3 seconds is an eternity when someone is watching you sign away your life. I could feel Monica's gaze on my hand the way a helmsman feels a cross-current through the wheel, invisible, insistent, pulling. But I was not signing with the Mont Blanc. 48 hours earlier, while Celine slept and the house breathed its nightly silence, I had made a phone call to Peggy Rawlings from the prepaid phone in my clean bedroom. I told her about the 3 microphones, the clipboard woman, the silver Lexus, and the certainty that Monica would return with documents requiring my signature. Peggy listened without interruption, a quality I admired in lawyers almost as much as I admired it in executive officers, and then she asked a single question. "Bobby, can you get your hands on a thermoreactive gel pen?" "I did not know what that was," she explained. "A thermoreactive pen uses ink that becomes invisible when exposed to heat friction, warm air, even body temperature over time. The writing appears permanent at the moment of signing, but fades to nothing within hours, leaving a blank page." The technology was originally designed for children's novelty products, but Peggy had seen it used in a fraud case in Savannah, where a contractor had tricked an elderly homeowner into signing a lien that later vanished, leaving the original document unsigned and therefore void. "We reverse the weapon," she said. "You sign with the disappearing ink. The signature looks real long enough for Monica to believe the deal is done. By the time the document reaches the title company, the signature line is blank. The power of attorney is invalid, and Monica has handed us a document that proves intent without giving her the authority to execute. It was elegant. It was ruthless. And it required one thing I did not have: the pen. Peggy solved that problem. The following afternoon, while I rocked on the porch feeding the microphones my performance of confusion, a FedEx truck made its usual pass down Broad Street at 7:42, the same truck I had logged every Wednesday for 9 weeks. But this time the driver paused at my mailbox and deposited a small padded envelope addressed to Robert Callahan. Inside was a pen matte black barrel, silver clip, the same diameter and weight profile as a Mont Blanc Meisterstück. Peggy had sourced it from an evidence locker in the Savannah field office. Tucked inside the envelope was a handwritten note on yellow legal paper. Loaded and ready. Approximate fade time: 4-6 hours at room temperature. Faster if exposed to direct heat or sunlight. Do not test it. You only have one cartridge. One cartridge. One signature. One chance. I had hidden the pen inside my flannel shirt pocket. Behind the reading glasses, I pretended to lose every morning. And now, as Monica watched me hover the Mont Blanc over the signature line, I executed the switch. It was a simple maneuver, the kind of sleight I had learned, not from any spy manual but from my father, who had been a gifted amateur magician in his retirement years. He called it the sailor's swap. You hold the visible object in your dominant hand, draw attention to it with a slight tremor, and use the opposite hand to retrieve the hidden object from a pocket or sleeve while the audience tracks the tremor. The key is misdirection, not speed, not dexterity, but the management of attention. My right hand trembled over the Mont Blanc. Monica's eyes followed the tremor. My left hand, my actual dominant hand, a detail Monica had never noticed, because she had never cared to study the man she was robbing, slipped into the shirt pocket, palmed the thermoreactive pen, and brought it below the table's edge. In one continuous motion, I let the Mont Blanc roll from my right fingers as though the tremor had become too much, caught it with an embarrassed fumble, and replaced it on the table. "I'm sorry," I said, shaking my right hand. "The fingers aren't what they used to be. Let me try again." I picked up the thermoreactive pen with my left hand, a gesture that looked, from Monica's angle, like an old man grabbing the same pen from a slightly different position. The barrels were near identical, the weight was close enough, and Monica was watching my face, not my fingers, because the face was where she expected to find the hesitation she needed to overcome. "Take your time," she repeated. Her voice was steady, but I could see the tendons in her neck pulling taut. She wanted this done. The Escalade was idling. Kane was listening. The title company was expecting the signed document by noon. I lowered the pen to the signature line and wrote my name, Robert James Callahan. The ink flowed blue-black and smooth, identical in shade to the Mont Blanc's cartridge. The letters were slightly unsteady. I allowed the tremor to persist for authenticity, but legible, legal, and apparently permanent. I set the pen down, exhaled, and looked at Monica with the tired relief of a man who had just completed a task he did not fully understand. "There," I said. "Is that all right?" Monica picked up the document. She examined the signature for no more than 2 seconds, long enough to confirm it was there, not long enough to question its chemistry. Then she did something I had not anticipated. She smiled, not the practiced warmth of the caretaker performance, not the calculated patience of the con artist at work. A genuine smile, the kind that surfaces when a long campaign finally reaches its objective and the tension breaks like a fever. For one instant, I saw the real Monica Callahan, not the yoga-practicing daughter-in-law who brought chamomile tea to her father-in-law's study, not the grieving wife who cried at Eleanor's funeral and held my hand at the graveside. The real Monica was a woman who had just stolen a house, a pension, and a man's autonomy with a single sheet of paper, and she was smiling because she believed she had won. "That's perfect, Bobby. Thank you." She slid the document into the blue folder, closed the gold-embossed cover, and placed it in the briefcase. The clasp snapped shut with a sound like a cell door closing, except the cell was hers, and she did not know it yet. "I'm going to take this to the advisor's office now," she said, standing. "Celine will stay with you today. I'll be back this evening for dinner. We can celebrate." "Celebrate what?" "Your future, Bobby. Everything is going to be taken care of." She kissed my forehead. Her lips were cool and dry, and they carried the scent of jasmine over something darker. I held still and let the kiss land the way a ship holds still when a torpedo passes beneath the keel, without detonating, motionless, breathless, aware that the explosive is still in the water. She walked out of the kitchen. I heard her heels cross the foyer, heard the front door open and close, heard the Escalade shift into reverse and pull down the driveway. Then silence. I sat at the kitchen table with the Mont Blanc in front of me and the thermoreactive pen back in my shirt pocket. And I watched the signature on nothing, because the document was already in the briefcase, already in the car, already on its way to a title company where it would arrive bearing my name in ink that was, at this very moment, beginning to fade. 4 to 6 hours. That was what Peggy had said. By the time the document reached the closing table, Robert James Callahan's signature would be a ghost present at the moment of writing, gone before the moment of execution. I picked up the coffee Monica had poured and drank it slowly. It was still warm. The ink would not be. The call came at 12:17. I was sitting in the study, the leather notebook open on my lap, watching the clock on the mantelpiece count down the final minutes of a 72-hour operation that had begun with a satellite call from the Persian Gulf and was about to end in a title company conference room I would never need to enter. The Hamburg clock ticked in the foyer below. The mockingbird sang in the magnolia. And somewhere across town, in an office, I imagined smelling of new carpet and old deception, Monica Callahan was discovering that the signature she had carried out of my kitchen 4 hours ago no longer existed. The prepaid phone vibrated once. Peggy Rawlings. "It's done," she said. No greeting, no preamble. Peggy spoke the way she litigated with economy and force. Monica presented the power of attorney to the title officer at Kessler, Brandt and Whitmore at 11:55. The officer examined the document, turned to the signature page, and found a blank line. No ink, no residue, nothing. I closed my eyes. The relief did not come as a wave, it came as a stillness. The kind of stillness that follows a storm when the wind drops and the sea flattens and you realize you have survived something that was never guaranteed. What did she do? She argued. She insisted the document had been signed. She demanded to see Monica accused the officer of tampering. She threatened legal action. She called Victor Kane from the conference room. We have that call recorded. By the way, because Agent Decker had a federal warrant on Kane's phone as of 9 o'clock this morning. What did Kane say? Kane told her to stall. He said he would bring a second set of documents and have you sign again this evening. He used the phrase, "the old man won't know the difference," which is now part of the federal record. I opened my eyes and looked at the photograph of Eleanor on the desk, the one taken at Fort Sumter the year before she died. Her hair silver in the wind. Her smile aimed at something beyond the camera. She had always been the better navigator of the two of us. She could read people the way I read currents. And she had told me once, during the early months of Ethan's marriage, that Monica reminded her of a riptide beautiful on the surface, pulling everything beneath it toward open water. I should have listened sooner. "There's more," Peggy said. The Shadow Intercept activated at 12:03. Kane wired $1.2 million from his development account to the escrow account at Kessler, Brandt, and Whitmore as a deposit for the property purchase. The wire cleared the originating bank, but was rerouted at the Federal Reserve Clearinghouse into the frozen escrow controlled by NCIS and the FBI. Kane's system shows the transfer as complete. The title company's system shows the funds as received. But the money is sitting in a federal lock-a box, and neither Kane nor the title company can touch it. $1.2 million. The discounted price Victor Kane had negotiated with Monica for a house appraised at $5.6 million. A house built with timber from a decommissioned warship by a man who had cleared mines in the Pacific so his grandsons could grow up on solid ground. Kane had tried to buy 80 years of Callahan history for less than a quarter of its value. And now his own money was evidence in a wire fraud case that carried a mandatory minimum of 15 years. The thrift savings plan? I asked. Agent Decker traced the withdrawals. $775,789 were transferred over 14 months into a series of shell accounts registered to a holding company in Wilmington, Delaware. The holding company is owned by a trust. The trust is administered by, you can guess, Victor Kane. Victor Kane. NCIS has frozen every account in the chain. Recovery proceedings will begin next week. Decker estimates 80 to 90% of the funds are still liquid and recoverable. I wrote the number in the notebook. $775,789. Below it, I wrote, recoverable. The word looked strange on the page, too optimistic, too clean for the ugliness it represented. But I underlined it anyway, because my son deserved to see that number restored. And because some things that are stolen can be returned if someone is willing to do the work. And the arrests? Tonight. Decker wants Monica and Kane in the same location for a simultaneous pickup. He's asked me to confirm. Will Monica return to the house this evening? She told me she would be back for dinner. She said we were going to celebrate. A pause. Then Peggy's voice. Quieter now. Stripped of its courtroom edge. Bobby, are you all right? The question surprised me. Not because it was unexpected. Peggy was, beneath the legal armor, a deeply compassionate woman, but because I did not know the answer. Was I all right? I had spent 3 days pretending to be a man I was not, living under surveillance in my own home, lying to my son, and dismantling the life of a woman who had sat at my Thanksgiving table and carved turkey beside my grandchildren's empty chairs. I had won. The operation was successful. The house was safe. The money was frozen. The documents were void. But winning felt less like victory and more like surgery necessary, precise, and painful, in ways the anesthesia could not reach. "I'm fine," I said. "I'll have the table set for dinner. Bobby, one more thing. Ethan's commanding officer has been notified. Ethan is being flown stateside on emergency leave. He lands at Charleston AFB at 1600, 4 o'clock. My son would be home in less than 4 hours." I set the phone down and sat in the stillness of the study, surrounded by the artifacts of 4 generations, the navigation charts on the wall, the brass sextant on the shelf, the photograph of Eleanor at Fort Sumter, the Hamburg clock ticking its patient, honest rhythm below. This house had survived hurricanes, wars, economic collapses, and the slow erosion of time. It would survive this. I stood slowly, because the back demanded its toll regardless of the circumstances, and walked downstairs to the kitchen. Celine was on the porch, scrolling through her phone, oblivious. I ignored her. I opened the cabinet where Eleanor had kept her good china. The set with the navy blue rim she had bought in Annapolis the week Ethan received his commission. And I began to set the table. 4 places. Bobby, Ethan, Monica, and 1 empty chair at the head, where Eleanor had always sat, because I wanted Monica to see it when she walked in. I wanted her to see the empty place, and understand, in the final moments before everything collapsed, that the woman who had once occupied that chair would have seen through her on the first day. I folded the napkins into sharp military creases and placed a knife and fork at each setting. Then I went to the garden, cut 3 stems from Eleanor's roses, the ones Celine had forgotten to water, the ones I had kept alive in secret, and set them in a glass vase at the center of the table. The stage was set. The final watch was about to begin. Ethan walked through the front door at 4:11 in the afternoon, still wearing his flight suit, a duffel bag over one shoulder, and 16 hours of military transport behind his eyes. He looked older than when I had last seen him 5 months ago. Not aged exactly, but compressed, the way metal compresses under sustained pressure until it either hardens or fractures. He set the bag on the foyer floor, looked at me standing at the bottom of the stairs, and said nothing for a long time. Then he crossed the distance between us and wrapped his arms around me with the careful strength of a man who understood that his father's spine was held together with titanium and willpower. "I'm here," he said. "I know." I pressed my hand against the back of his head, the way I had done when he was 8 years old, and afraid of thunderstorms. "Welcome home, son." I told him everything. Not the abbreviated version I had fed him over the satellite phone, the full account. From the first mismatched perfume to the vanishing ink. I laid the leather notebook on the kitchen table between us and walked him through each entry. The handedness discrepancy, the dead Wi-Fi router, the hidden cameras, the hollow floorboard, the forged power of attorney, the drained thrift savings plan, the fabricated medical reports, the Zenith radio sweep, the 3 microphone frequencies, the silver Lexus, the clipboard woman, the deception broadcast, and the shadow intercept that was holding $1.2 million in a federal locky box with his wife's fingerprints on every document that had put it there. Ethan listened the way a sonar operator listens, motionless, absorbing every frequency, filtering signal from noise. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and stared at the table for a full minute. Then he looked at the 4 place settings, the navy blue china, the roses in the glass vase, and the empty chair at the head where his mother had always sat. "You kept her roses alive," he said. "Someone had to." He nodded once, and that was all. We did not discuss feelings. We did not analyze the betrayal or dissect the grief. Callahan men process pain the way they process squalls. You hold your heading, you ride it through, and you assess the damage when the sky clears. The sky had not cleared yet. Monica arrived at 6:30. She walked into the kitchen carrying a bottle of champagne and a smile so radiant it could have lit the harbor. She had changed clothes, a black cocktail dress now, pearl earrings, her hair down in waves that framed a face engineered for trust. She did not expect to find Ethan at the champagne bottle paused midair, and for 1/2 second, the mask slipped, not much, just enough for me to see the recalculation happening behind her eyes. Why is he here? What does he know? How do I adjust? Ethan. She recovered instantly. Oh my God. I had no idea you were coming home. How did? Emergency leave, he said. His voice was level. Sit down, Monica. She sat. She placed the champagne on the table beside the roses and folded her hands in her lap with the composure of a woman who still believed she was in control. Celine had retreated to the living room the moment Ethan arrived. I could hear her pacing near the front door, phone in hand, calculating her exit. Bobby, Monica said, turning to me with the caregiving voice. You didn't tell me Ethan was coming. I forgot, I said. You know how foggy I get. The line landed like a stone in still water. Ethan's jaw tightened. Monica's smile held, but the warmth drained from it degree by degree, the way heat leaves a room when someone opens a window in January. I placed the leather notebook on the table. Beside it, I placed the prepaid phone, and beside that, I placed the photograph I had kept in my breast pocket since Tuesday night, the grainy screenshot from the TikTok video, showing Monica in a Miami cabana with a man who was not my son, her 2-carat ring catching sunlight on a hand pressed against his chest. Monica looked at the photograph, then at the notebook, then at me. And for the first time since I had known her, she had no words. We know about Victor Kane, Ethan said quietly. We know about the house. We know about the TSP. We know about the medical reports. And we know about Celine. From the living room came the sound of the front door opening and then closing quickly. Celine, running. She would not get far. Peggy had warned me that NCIS would have the perimeter covered by 6 o'clock. Monica stood. The chair scraped against the hardwood, with a sound like a hull dragging over reef. Her hands were trembling now, not the theatrical tremor I had performed all week, but the real, involuntary shaking of a body that understood before the mind did that the game was over. Bobby, I can explain. No, I said. You can't. The doorbell rang at 6:47. I opened it to find Agent Decker, a compact man with a Navy NCIS badge on his belt, and 2 federal marshals flanking the porch steps. Behind them, at the end of the driveway, the silver Lexus was parked at an angle with its doors open, and Victor Kane standing beside it in handcuffs, his gray suit jacket torn at the shoulder, where someone had encouraged him to stop resisting. Celine was in the back seat of an unmarked sedan, the $15,000 check my check, written in trembling script to a woman who thought she was being bought, sealed in an evidence bag on the seat beside her. Decker looked at me. Mr. Callahan? Come in, I said. She's in the kitchen. I did not watch them lead Monica out. I did not need to. I stood in the foyer beside the Hamburg clock and listened to the sounds, the reading of rights, the click of handcuffs, the measured footsteps across the porch, the closing of a car door. Then silence. The kind of silence that follows the last note of a song you never wanted to hear in the first place. Ethan found me in the study an hour later. I was sitting in my chair with Eleanor's photograph in my hands, the navigation charts on the wall behind me, the brass sextant catching the last amber light of a Charleston evening through the west window. He sat in the chair beside mine, the chair Eleanor had always used, and neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, he reached into his pocket and placed something on the table between us. A challenge coin, bronze, heavy, engraved with the crest of his carrier strike group, and the motto, ready on arrival. He set it beside the glass vase of Eleanor's roses, and the clink of metal on wood was the only sound in the room. "Thank you, Dad. You would have done the same for me." "I know. But I didn't have to." We sat together as the light shifted from amber to gold to gray, and the Hamburg clock marked the hours the way it had marked them for 70 years, patient, steady, indifferent to the drama that unfolded beneath its pendulum. When full dark came, I stood and walked to the kitchen to make coffee, real coffee, brewed in the percolator Eleanor had insisted on keeping long after the rest of the world moved to drip machines. Ethan followed. We stood at the counter and drank in silence, looking out the window at the garden where the roses grew in defiance of every hand that had neglected them. At dawn, I carried 2 mugs to the front porch and sat in Eleanor's rocking chair. Ethan took the chair beside me. The sun came up over Charleston Harbor the way it always does, slowly, then all at once, painting the water gold and turning the rooftops into a skyline that has survived 300 years of storms. "What now?" Ethan asked. I sipped my coffee and watched a mockingbird settle on the magnolia branch where it had been singing all week. The only honest voice on the frequency, keeping its song unchanged while every other signal around it had been a lie. "Now," I said, "we hold our course." The morning watch had begun. The house was still standing. The foundation was sound, and the Callahan name, carved in timber, sealed in tabby, passed from father to son for 4 generations, was exactly where it had always been, right here, on solid ground. If this story gave you something, a moment of tension, a breath of relief, a reminder that age is not weakness and patience is not surrender, then I have one request. Subscribe. Not for me. For every person who has ever been underestimated because of their age, their silence, or their willingness to wait. Hit the subscribe button, turn on the bell, and come back, because the next story might be yours.